Just kind of set the tone for our presentations from our two guests, Curt Lawhead from Equitrans and Thecla Sweeney from Motion. Brian and I prepared a chapter for a book in honor of Bill Mobley. Bill Mobley was our partner for a number of years in Shanghai and in China, well known to many members of the organizational, behavior community, but sadly passed away early last year. And the book was on coaching and was on leadership coaching. So that helped us pull our thoughts together here, and that's what I want to present for a few minutes today. And I'll talk for 15, 20 minutes, give you an overview, give the ideas. We'll take a few minutes for questions on that, and then we'll move on to Curt and Dave Kirchhoff and Valerie Thomas that worked with Equitrans and the Equitrans presentation. So I guess the first point in this is that culture and leadership have always been a part of our practice, because in fact they're really two sides of the same coin. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Does culture drive leadership, or does leadership drive culture? Well, the answer is yes. I mean, over the short term, you join a new organization as a new leader, you're going to react to the situation that you're in. You're going to try to fit in. You're going to try to make your own changes, find your own spot, gather some traction, learn about the organization, and try to fit in. But on the other side, over time, where does the culture of the organization come from? Well, it comes out of the activities of the people, especially the leaders. And so over time, the culture reflects a social learning process that's driven by the leaders in an organization, but involves all of the members of an organization as they, learn the lessons that are most important to helping the organization survive and thrive, and then pass those on to the next generation of team members and of leaders. So, the long and short of it is that the people make the place. Yes, the place influences the people, but in fact, no one of these hands makes the circle. Okay, it's the group learning, it's the collective process. That's what builds the culture. And so in our work, we're always really trying to figure out, well, when do we need to intervene with respect to the individual leaders? And when do we need to intervene or try to with respect to the organization, its structure, its processes, the way it works? And you need to work both sides of that same coin. Now, as we've used this in combination, we've gotten into many situations that start to look like this. And this is a real live example here. And this is an organization where we did culture, surveys and had results broadly across the most of the entire organization. And it really showed an organization that wasn't very flexible. They paid some attention to their customer, but their creating change scores in particular at a 12 were quite low. And, they had some challenges in other areas and a lot of strengths. Very consistent, but not very adaptable. And, we encounter lots of organizations like that. And the focus of their change efforts were to try to become more agile. And we did everything we could to help them on that mission. But some of the insight came when we were working with a large number of their leaders, coaching them, using the 360 feedback to help with that coaching process, and then trying to summarize what were the strengths and the challenges overall of the leadership group. Well, as we did this, we started to realize pretty clearly that the organizational agenda of becoming more agile and more adaptable had a lot of supporters, had a lot of talent internally, had a lot of capability that could be deployed, but we weren't really making that connection. So, for example, this is the top quarter of the leaders with respect to their adaptability. And, scores are high, overall. But quite interesting that you have this potent combination, at least in our eyes, of adaptable leaders that are really good at driving culture change in a context that badly needs that change. And this got us kind of scratching our heads and thinking about this, because in this case, starting to kind of mobilize that group, just be aware of the fairly large number of leaders that were really, really well equipped to meet the challenges of the organization, but weren't yet organized. And there's a lot of things that we suggested in this case. One of the things that's very powerful is if you simply bring that, group together. This is the agile leaders, and let them work on the strategies of how you can make the organization itself more agile. And it's never easy. It's easier said than done. But we thought that had a whole lot of potential. So, and that helped us in this project, and we'll see some aspects of this in the two case examples that we'll talk about in our panel this afternoon. But then when we tried to think about how do we make sense of that, we developed a model. And this is what we published in the book. And this built on some earlier work that Levi Niemanen did and his colleague Ben Biermeyer Hansen, where we'd started looking in the context of leadership development programs at kind of the match between the characteristics of the culture and the characteristics of the leader. In Levi's work, this came in kind of a different context where they were doing a leadership development program with another client. And they started using the culture data from the organization as a whole to inform that. Because, suppose you didn't know which one of these four boxes you were in and you were trying to coach a leader. I think that'd be kind of confusing, because this really helps clear a lot of things up when we combine the strengths of the culture and the challenges of the culture with the strengths and challenges of the individual leader. So, when we did that, what we started to think about was that we have some examples where the culture is very strong and the leaders mirror those strengths. So that's in your upper right corner there. That, in this case, the strengths exist in the culture. They're in a context where that's easy to learn, and your coaching work, may focus on things like helping them establish kind of mentorship relationships to learn the culture, and to draw on the strengths, and to draw on the experience of the people that are already familiar with the next challenge that they're trying to meet. So that's one example. But on the other end of the scale, if you go to the lower left corner here, that's a little different, because neither the leader nor the culture have those characteristics. And it's a bit like the blind leading the blind. If you're expecting to find a mentor in this culture, that will help the leader develop. Or if you're even trying to, explain, what does mission look like? What does strategy, vision, and goals look like to this leader? You're kind of hard pressed to find good examples of that in the culture. And this kind of combination often means that outside examples are really helpful and compelling for coaching an individual leader. So, that's strong and strong, strong and strong, and then like challenged and challenged corners of this 2x2 show us examples where both leaders and culture are strong, both leaders and culture are weak. And that's a really helpful starting point for a coach. But maybe even more helpful is when you see that a leader in the upper left-hand corner, you see that a leader has a terrific number of strengths and capabilities in a culture that really doesn't have those. Now, if this leader's your new CEO, you need to figure out how to leverage that capability, how to build the alignment, and how to kind of communicate and spread those talents and capabilities that the new leader has. On the other hand, if this is somebody that just got their first promotion and is still 4 or 5 layers deep in the organization, this is going to be kind of a frustrating situation. The culture probably badly needs the capabilities of the leader, but is quite possibly not really very receptive to those. And so the coaching process there is a very different thing. I mean, the leader needs to recognize that their biggest contribution is really, being a change agent. And that they already have a lot in their own portfolio, in their own set of competencies that can benefit the organization. But, if they're thinking of themselves as I'm really an individual contributor, just trying to manage my people now, you're really leaving a lot on the table. So, this difference is an important one too, because people with this pattern, strong leaders in a weak culture, those are your change agents. Those are people where you can build on the capability that they offer, that they represent to the organization as you try to change the organization. Then the last corner of the model here, down in the lower right-hand corner, is the flip side of that. Well, here's a leader that really is kind of struggling, not up to speed yet, and then they're in a culture that actually has a lot of those strengths. And the good news about this is that mentorship relations, role models, internal examples, the benefit of feedback itself. If the feedback that the leader got on their 360 is about how they are leading, but the very people that gave them that feedback are also probably quite skilled in understanding, well, here's how you can do that. And here's how that's been done successfully in our organization. And so that's a very different dynamic. And for a coach, knowing that they've got the leader data that are in the upper left or the lower right, but not knowing what the culture context is, really creates a lot of ambiguity in the coaching process. And if you have a sense of what that context is, then you can do much more targeted work as a coach. So that's kind of the long and short of this insight. We'll post the book chapter so you can read it in more detail, and it does have some real implications here, and I just want to close with a couple comments about that, and also make note of a couple of other leadership innovations that we've developed this last year or so that we're also using with more of our client organizations. Leadership development and organizational change are often quite separate within organizations. The bigger the organization, the more separate they are. They may have different bosses. They may report up to different parts of the organization. They may have different tools, models, approaches that in some cases are actually pretty complex to integrate. I remember one time doing work with Scott Paper Company years ago, when we found really there were 7 or 8 different models and initiatives that it would take to integrate the work with leaders, teams, and the organization. Sheesh, you needed a PhD just to understand all of the tools. There's tremendous simplicity and value in combining them. There are a few approaches in the field that use the same model, similar model for both levels. Human synergistics for years, colleagues and in the industry also have that capability, but it's less common than you might think. And there's a lot of value in combining these and aligning them, because after all, do you want to develop leaders that help build the culture for the past? No, I don't think so. The future's coming at us faster and faster every day. And so developing leaders in a way that converges with the plans for developing the culture for the future really has a lot of benefits. And in smaller organizations, these two activities in two organizations can often be more closely connected, and there this link is much easier to make. And this is one of the ways that we developed to integrate culture and leadership in our practice that we wanted you to be aware of. And as I said, we'll post the book chapter and the presentation and video and all of that. But, be really glad also to respond to any thoughts or comments that you have about that. One other thing that I wanted to make note of before turning over to for a little Q&A time is that we also have 2 other innovations that are relatively new that combine leadership and culture in new and innovative ways. One is what we've called the Leadership Effectiveness Index. And what we did here, really pretty simple, is we were trying to meet the need for clients that said, we want to get a general sense of how the leadership capability of the organization is viewed. Do people have confidence? Do they think the leaders are providing good strategic direction, adaptability in the marketplace, and all of those good things? But they didn't want to do this in the context of a Leadership 360 with a feedback and coaching process. They wanted to do this in the context of doing an assessment of the culture of the organization. So with a little bit of time scratching our heads with Brian and Dave, Michael, all the team saying, how can we go at this? We did something really simple. We took, kind of the highest impact, best, validity item out of each one of the 12 indexes in the Leadership 360, and we turned it into a culture item and made a module out of that. So we've got a 12-item module, 1 on each of the 12 indexes. And then we asked these questions, as you can see over here on the left-hand side, about the leaders and managers in the organization. And so this is a set of questions that we ask that are about leadership in general. It's not designed to provide feedback to a specific leader, and you have to be very clear about that in the start. Because if somebody starts asking for this data on an organization that has part of the organization that has 10 people, well, that's looking like feedback on a specific leader, and that's not the intention with this. It's about a broader look at leadership in the organization. What are some of the strengths, some of those challenges? That can be done as a part of an organizational level survey. We've used this now with several clients, off to a good start, have several more underway. And so we're interested in using this to help continue to build the leverage that we have in combining culture and leadership. Then the other example that I want to talk about for just a second is a tool that we've developed that we call the Leadership Potential Report. This was a collaboration with Hogan Assessments, and we built on their personality assessments to predict the capability or the potential for each of the leadership competencies in our model. This is useful to us for two reasons, really. I mean, the first one is in leader development. This means that you can start with a self-assessment that's rooted in personality with leaders, and sometimes that's a helpful way to start. We did a webinar on this just a few weeks ago with Hogan to both their network and ours. And one of the clients that we used as the case study said, we're not really quite ready for a 360 level feedback process. We'd like to start with a self-assessment with our leaders. And so this fit that purpose really well. And because it's a self-assessment, this is also a great tool for selection, promotion, and transitions. And the way that it works is that you complete the 3 core Hogan personality assessments, and then we can produce this report. And the webinar gives a lot more detail on how that happens and how we use it. But especially for those of you that are certified in the Hogan method, or your organizations use it, we wanted to make sure you were aware of this connection too. So let me stop there, because we want to switch over to Curt Lawhead here in a few minutes. But let's take a minute if there's any questions or issues that you want to raise. Nellie, any questions out there from our participants?
Yeah, we've got a lot of really good questions. One of the first questions that we got was, given the reciprocal relationship between culture and leadership within a dynamic context, is there a dimension that becomes more important to enable growth?
Well, it's a good question. The research finding we have over and over again on the culture and performance studies is that external focus drives growth. And so, if the challenge was growing the organization, we'd be in there looking for the leaders for whom that comes naturally, because actually them getting some attention and some empowerment to help drive this agenda can really help to drive growth. There's a lot of other aspects to that, but let me stop there and maybe take time for another question or two.
Yeah, here's another good one. How can we help a leader be open and willing to undertake a leadership assessment?
Well, the Leadership Potential Report, which I guess I still have up on the screen here, probably time for me to stop the share and come back face to face. Yeah, one of the things that is often more attractive about a self-assessment is that the leader's not kind of immediately confronted with feedback from other people. That always will include some challenges. And so I think in some ways that's part of our thinking behind the collaboration with Hogan, is this would give us a bit less kind of potentially intimidating approach to get started. And then maybe you want to build to a more complete 360 assessment process. I think the most persuasive way, though, is to show that leader examples that have worked. Nothing so persuasive as a leader that they admire in their own organization, showing the value that they put in what many have called like a coaching culture, where openness to feedback is really a part of the growth process. A friend of mine for years is fond of saying feedback is the breakfast of champions, like Wheaties. If we understand this, embrace it, and learn from it. I think the other powerful point is clarifying this is about development and not about assessment. And if you have a system where you do 360 assessments, just before you decide how much of a raise somebody's going to get, then you're creating an environment where it's very difficult to separate development from assessment, and that makes the feedback more intimidating, and also increases all of the incentives to bias it to just kind of get good news. So stress development in that. Start small. You can start very small. You can just ask someone who's a coach about the perspective of their team members on their leadership. You can go for a informal qualitative 360 to get some comments to help build that appetite. Maybe one more quick question.
Yeah, let's do one, and then we can transition over
Yeah.
to Curt and the rest of the team. Here's a really good one that I liked. It seems that an organization with a strong culture is more likely to have members of its workforce who practice leadership in their own roles,
Yes.
giving the organization a larger pool of talent from which leader positions could be filled. And it seems like you have evidence of this, and they were just wondering if you could confirm their suspicions or their assumptions on that.
Oh yeah. It's really, really rich. What goes around comes around. You get this ball moving and it really, really gathers force, and people just learn, osmosis all the time, what it means to be a good leader, a good coach, a supportive leader. Much harder when you're starting from scratch. And that's one of the things that drove this as a coaching perspective, is if you're a coach, you're dealing with somebody that is starting from scratch. It's important to know you're in an organization that's also starting from scratch, because that helps define what some of your options would be. So thanks. Glad to continue this discussion in our LinkedIn group or by email.